Welcome to another VC Wisdom Pod. We have Brian Ruszczyk with us. He's co-founder and CEO at EFF Ventures. Seeing a bunch of milk pictures on his LinkedIn. He's in Geneva. I am in Mexico, Oaxaca, Mexico. We're going to talk about venture today. We're going to talk about Brian's impressive career. Worked at Deutsche, that is, JP Morgan, Citi, and a whole bunch of other prominent banking organizations. We're going to talk about Switzerland startup ecosystem as well, which has been pretty quiet, but who knows? And maybe a bit about the European startup ecosystem, which Brian might be more knowledgeable than I am. This podcast is brought to you by podfire.com. That's my podcasting company. If you want to start a podcast, go to podfire.com. I can help you scale it and monetize it. Brian, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and about EFF Ventures.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Charles. About myself, American, grew up in the shadow of New York. I've been overseas for 30 years now. I started with JP Morgan in the Latin American circuit, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Santiago. I got shipped off to Geneva, where I ran the JP Morgan Latin American private bank for many, many years. Then I moved on to run Greece and Turkey for Deutsche Bank. Same business, family offices, wealth management. I did that for close on 30 years. And then we went independent and set up our offices in the Cayman Islands. My co-founder is Brazilian. He moved to Cayman to run that office for a few years. Another co-founder is Greek. She sits in Athens. And today, we've completely pivoted our DNA on the firm, and we channel capital towards innovative food technologies in specific synthetic biology. And I guess we're doing the same thing we did for 30 years by working with our families as our main sources of capital. We're just channeling it towards venture and early stage innovations in food versus managing their overall portfolios.
So what brought you to that segment in itself? I see that you're in ESG and impact investing. Why did you choose that over pure capitalistic thesis?
Well, I think by definition, all of the innovations that are occurring in the food industry today are focused on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, removal of animal protein from the system via synthetic biology, whatever your view is on that or not. And so by definition, it's not that we moved into ESG or impact. Our industry is ESG and impact by definition. The technologies are allowing us to produce proteins inside enclosed environments with a lower carbon footprint.
And why did you go that way? Did you have a consciousness glimpse of like, oh shit, we're burning the planet?
No, neither. Good question. We teamed up with ex-colleagues of mine from Deutsche Bank that set up their own asset management firm in Singapore, whose sole purpose is to be the world's largest producer of Atlantic salmon on land outside urban centers, utilizing a technology called RAS, Recirculated Aquatic Systems. We don't own that business. We partnered with them and have a significant stake in the fund of our client capitals that we raised over the years. And that was our first foray into what was a large-scale project. We raised just north of $350 million for that project for new facilities at scale to produce Atlantic salmon. It has nothing to do with synthetic biology. We actually grow fish inside factories from egg to full harvest. We just do it on land as opposed to the current technology, which is off the coast of Norway and Chile, which are the main two main producers. We can do it anywhere in the world with our technologies and don't need to be ocean-based. That was our first foray into food technologies. It happened all by accident, as things happen in life. And from there, we pivoted to synthetic biology.
What's the problem with Beyond Meat?
How much time do we have, Charles? The problem. First of all, the company was sold to us as a tech company when it went public at 20 times sales. No one has EBITDA in our industry. All the companies are valued on multiples of sales. When Beyond went public at $1 billion, it had 50 million of sales. From there, it ran up to 12 billion market cap on the back of 600 million in sales. So it kept its ratio of 20 times sales until the industry realized that these growth stocks, which is how the investment bankers were selling them to us, weren't growth stocks if they couldn't keep up the growth. And all it needed was one quarter to miss their numbers, and people valued it to where it is today, which is food. So while they are using new technologies and different ingredients, at the end of the day, they're producing a burger or a sausage, and food has a price. Food doesn't have a Tesla price. Food doesn't have a Google price. Food has a food price. Kraft Heinz, Nestle, et cetera, et cetera. So either it's 8 or 11 times EBITDA. In our case, there is no EBITDA, so we have to use a multiple of sales. And that multiple of sales today, currently on the two public companies in our space, Beyond and Oatly, is 1.5 times sales max. So these companies were never worth 12 and $17 billion respectively, which is where they charged up to. They're back down priced as food, which is what they are.
Do you think consumers will adopt like meatless products? Because me, when I see these, I just see like inflammation bombs, like as a biohacker, meat does very well with my own body. I don't like killing creatures, but if it is for my own thriving, I will eat meat, if it is for my own energy and if I can get energy and maximize my impact in this world. So do you feel that consumers think that way? They think of these foods as like toxic foods for their body, or is that going to fade away?
Well, I think you have to distinguish between plant-based products that are processed in a plant-based diet. There are tons of tremendous triathletes that are vegan and don't eat animal protein, and you can get as much protein as you want from a plant-based diet without having to go to animal protein if you choose to do so. Your question is the processed burgers and the imitation product that is trying to mimic what were meat products, versus a bowl of lentils that you can eat packed full of proteins, right? I think it's up to the consumer. Every consumer is different. The consumer in California is different from the consumer in Kansas, is different from the consumer in Europe. Europe has a big greenhouse gas emission, climate following consumer. It's a bigger market, overtook the US last year in alternative proteins. But I think each consumer is different, and we're not trying to push our agenda onto anybody, Charles. We're not trying to say us versus them at all, but we are trying to create an industry with choices for end consumers. And up to now, they really haven't had choices. I buy an Impossible Burger. For me, it's 95% there. It's virtually identical for a meat burger and at price parity. And it doesn't make any sense for me to eat meat when I have something identical or almost identical for me on shelf. I'm a cancer survivor, so I gave up meat a few years back, and that was my main reason was health issues for me more than anything.
And there's science proving that red meat or meats could cause cancer, inflammation,
Yeah.
I guess. And
Yeah. Most doctors recommend to cut down on your red meat intake and reduce consumption, eat more fish, eat more vegetables. Yeah. But there are studies on everything, Charles. The meat producers are going to have their own studies that point in a different direction, and it's a well-greased lobby out there, and everybody has a different opinion and a different research report that they can point to prove their point.
there's a market for people that want to eat vegan food, and
Yeah,
I guess there's
it's
a
a small
scientific
market,
way
but growing.
to like inject like all the macro and the micros in there.
Yep.
For sure. Like the startups that you've funded so far, can you give us example? I saw free milk in there.
That's our new partnership. That's a company called Strive. The brand is called Free Milk. Company is Strive Nutrition, phenomenal company out of Wichita, Kansas, and they are a branded company, so they have product on shelf, B2C, in the New York tri-state area, New England, Benton, New Jersey, Benton, Wisconsin, but for the most part on the eastern seaboard. And they are producers of a non-dairy milk, not from plants, not almond milk or oat milk, but from precision fermentation. So we produce bioidentical protein whey, not from the cow, but from precision fermentation. And the purpose of this call is not to go into the technology, but suffice it to say it involves yeast and sugars and the production of an end product, a powder that is bioidentical to milk from a cow. And this is an exciting space for us. All of the dairy companies are moving into the space. Nestle just made a big announcement over the weekend. They're moving into the space. And we, unlike meat, which is well entrenched and there's meat lovers, we do envision a world where there are no more cows in the next 50 years producing milk. We can produce it already with the technologies we have in a much cleaner, safer, environmentally friendly way. The challenge to the industry, Charles, is the lack of infrastructure for all of this stuff to be produced. We have the technology, we've got at lab scale, we've got a pilot scale, we don't have commercial scale.
Is because you seem to be attacking the cow problem, right? First, it's sad to see them slaughtered. Second, they emit a lot of emissions, these cows. What about a machine to filter the CO2 out of the air? Have you thought of this as a solution to that big problem that is climate change?
I'm sure there are people out there working on that. I know there are a few gas fermentation companies that remove carbon dioxide from the air and actually produce a powder protein. A company out of Finland called Solar Foods. It's exactly what they do. Again, pilot scale, no commercial scale. It's going to take years for the industry to actually scale out. We, particularly EFF Ventures, haven't looked at technologies removing carbon dioxide from the air just to remove carbon dioxide unless it has a food component, because we are solely focused on the production of alternative food sources.
Interesting. You only invest also in A, B, and C round. Why is that?
Yeah, typically. We don't like to get involved too early, Charles. Seed round, 100,000, 500, it's not worth the amount of time and energy that goes into it for us. We've never been seed investors. We prefer to go in later at a higher valuation when we see the company established, it's survived, it's well capitalized, has great partners in its cap table. We're typically not that early stage, even though we're in an early stage industry and we are early stage investors. We don't like to do early stage investing in an early stage industry. Yeah, we're not the first check.
Right. And what kind of exits are you looking for? Is it first 5, 10 years down the line? And if so, what would
We're
your
not a
liquid?
fund, so we don't need to worry about the exits because we don't have a limited life shelf. We don't have an A+1+1 in a classic structure of GPLP, so it gives us a lot more flexibility, and we don't have pressure from our LPs to exit on the assets. So we're not operating as a classic venture fund because we are not a fund.
Right.
And
So
there are tons of benefits to having the pros and cons, but tons of benefits of having the structure that we have, which is just an asset management firm channeling our clients' capital towards the industry.
right. So when is your actual liquidity event and what could it look like? Is it 10x returns, 20 returns, and how much startups out of how much you invest?
It's hard to say. Right now, the industry's been thrown under the bus, right? As with almost all venture these days, it's not just food, it's venture in general. So the valuations have come down. So I can't give you an X on that. We've been pretty cautious in the industry. We've been sidelined a lot because we couldn't get our hands around the lofty valuations that were kicking around in the industry. Now, in this current environment, with kind of a lot of blood in the streets, we actually love this market. We love what's going on because the valuations have come down tremendously. Everybody needs capital. We are providers of capital. And so I would say on average, Charles, we're looking at a 3 to 4x because we get in later. We're not in the seed, and we're typically focused on A or later. And some of those companies won't make it. We know this. This is venture, right? It's a rule of numbers. And those that do, maybe we'll get a 10, 12x. But you average that out, and we're probably looking at, in the current environment, which is, there's a lot of malaise out there, probably a 4 to 5x at the moment.
And that's out of how many startups? Like 1 out of 10 will have an exit and the other 9 will just fail or break even?
Or be acquired. It's not just going public or IPO, it's also being acquired. We're working with the incumbents in our industry, so big dairy, big beverage, big meat groups, big seafood groups, as part of the participants in our cap table. So if these companies do take off, too early to tell, the natural exit is a trade sale, not just an IPO or go public.
Tell me about your career at these multiple big banks and how you met your partner, Ricardo.
So I met Ricardo at JP Morgan. I was originally at Chase. He was at JP Morgan. The two companies merged. He was on the Brazil desk. I was on the trading desk for Latin America, and that was an easy meet. And we've been working together for close on 20 years. JP Morgan was Latin America for me. Deutsche Bank was Greece and Turkey for me. And yeah, that was 30 years, 30 years in the making.
So total of like 20 years in banking. Most people don't even survive 3 years there. What was your tip there?
What's my tip for surviving in banking for 30
Yeah, and
years?
thriving.
Yeah. Keep moving. Keep moving. Yeah, I guess you get stagnant anywhere. 30 years was enough for me. Um, and I was doing the same thing over and over again, managing assets, which is great in the first years. And as I was younger, I loved the trading and I loved the desk and the markets, but not at 50. Right? That's a young kid's shop. So I guess the tip is keep reinventing yourself, and we've reinvented ourselves over and over again. I was running one region in Latin America, then I moved on to run a different region, Greece and Turkey. By another 5 years in running a new region, it's right. It's all new. I live in Geneva. It's either easy for me to get to Athens. I go to Athens for lunch and dinner and come back the next day. Latin America, I had to plan a 6-week trip. It's very different.
So I guess like there's two strategies for a big bank to keep you. Like one is to have you travel around, right? Like that's pretty cool. And second is a very high salary.
Yeah, they try and lock you in until they can't anymore.
So how did that happen for you? What was like enough? Like I need to start my own stuff and
When I started in banking, Charles, it was creative. We had lots of innovation. We had a lot of freedom since the crisis of 2008, when compliance basically took over the industry. So we lost our creativity, we lost our innovation, and it was stifling for me. And time to move on.
let's say in the 90s, an expected salary at JP Morgan, like at least 500K a year.
Depends what you were doing.
In your
Significantly
case,
more than that. In my case, significantly more than that. But I was managing $6 billion. So that's a different magnitude, right?
right? Yeah, you're right into saying that compliance, especially since 2008. I mean, you've witnessed also the dot-com boom and bust. Have you seen
The
it
whole thing.
different after that?
I've witnessed many busts, yours included, in Mexico. I was living in Mexico City when con el tequilazo. You may not remember that. You're probably too young. That was early 90s when the peso blew up and Salinas was, well, it wasn't Salinas. I forget his name. But anyway, Mexico depegged their currency, and that was the Mexican implosion. And Clinton was president back then. I saw the Russian default and the Asian currency crisis and the Greek default. And I've seen multiple crises. The dot-com was just one of many, Charles.
What are you seeing in the markets that no one is seeing right now? Moments of where people are not looking up.
I think the biggest issue to the markets right now is geopolitical. Whether it's our election in the U.S. or Israel, Middle East, Ukraine, Russia, I think we're not paying enough attention to the potential spillovers of both of these conflicts, and a change in the administration in the U.S. next year that could really put us in a tailspin.
But aren't we already experiencing the side effects of the Ukraine-Russia war and potentially even Israel and Hamas?
Not if it spills over.
Spills over, meaning that it becomes a world war and everyone's involved.
No, I didn't say world war. You're putting words in my mouth. Trump gets elected and pulls the U.S. out of NATO, or stops funding Ukraine, and Russia walks into Kyiv. That's going to change the map of Europe forever.
Right. What would be the consequences of that economically?
I don't think there'll be economic consequences immediately. I think there will be tremendous geopolitical consequences for Europe, particularly what was ex-Eastern Europe, part of the Soviet Union, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Hungary, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think we want an aggressive Russia on the prowl. Right now, we've been able to box them in and stuck in Ukraine, but that could change overnight with the new administration. And that's a dangerous, slippery slope.
It is. What major product market fits are you seeing in your field? Okay, like in the meatless world, like is it mushrooms to grow fish? I had some of these
Yeah, we
entrepreneurs
love the
on my pod.
mycelium space. We think mycelium has a huge future going forward. Mycelium is the root of the mushroom, of course. Probably close to 50 companies around the world today working on reproducing that mycelium root en masse in what we call biomass fermentation facilities to reproduce. You have a big company in the US called Meati out of Colorado. They've already got product on shelf across coast to coast, sitting right next to Impossible and Beyond burgers, but rather than using pea and soy protein, which is what Impossible and Beyond do, they're using mycelium as the root of their main ingredient, raw materials to produce their chicken fillet and products. And we think that's an exciting space, very exciting, because it doesn't rely on agricultural inputs like soy and pea do. We produce the mycelium inside a factory.
Right. Are you also seeing some markets opening themselves up quite quickly to meatless products?
Okay, you're calling it meatless. We call it alternative proteins because dairy is cowless and whayless, but it's not meatless, right? So we have liquid product, but I understand that a lot of people confuse it. Alternative proteins, we're seeing tremendous regulatory change. Well, Europe is the largest market today. It overtook the US. China is embracing alternative proteins very rapidly. I think what we're seeing right now, you mentioned .com. We're right now in the middle of a .com bubble in synthetic biology and alternative proteins, Charles, because a lot of these companies got funded and capitalized at crazy valuations. There was a lot of silly money being thrown around the industry at silly numbers, and that's all come off the table because of the current crisis we had across all asset classes over the last 24 months. And venture, of course, was one of the ones to suffer the most because they are early stage, non-revenue generating companies.
Thank you so much for the wisdom you've dropped today, Brian. Where can people find out more about you?
You can find me on LinkedIn under my name, or you can visit our website at Earth First Food Ventures. Reach out for any questions.